Margaret, if you'd like to start your presentation then.
Thanks, Desha, and thanks a lot to all the team members of the ScRAP project, the Scotland Rock Art project, having thought about me to close this seminar series and to discuss and explain my work in the Artsoundscapes project. So let's go ahead and let me explain a bit about this project. Right, Artsoundscapes. This is the acronym for a project called The Sound of Special Places, Exploring Rock Art Soundscapes and the Sacred. It was applied in September 2017 and started a year later after the EAA 2018 that I organized. So it wasn't the best month to start a project for me, but if I wanted my people to have offices, that was it. I had to start. So it was pretty busy from the start, trying to close up something and start this huge project. We then organized new equipment, and when we were about to go to do field work, COVID-19 started. So that meant that everything had to stop, and we therefore, after a few months, seeing that wasn't going to be short, we applied and obtained an extension for 1 more year. So that means that if the project was going to be 5 years, now it will be 6, and we will end up in September 2024. Right, what's the aim of this project? The Artsoundscapes project aims to understand the role of sound and emotion in the engagement with the sacred in rock art landscapes of pre-modern societies. That's what we said in the project application. I think that if I had been writing it now, I would have discussed or framed everything more than the sacred, which is not bad, but I think that I would have framed it in the framework of ontologies. Right. Sound. Let's see some of the components of this aim, of this project aim. Sound. Why sound? Why should we be studying sound? And here, this slide gets some of the ideas published by Ian Morley, talking about music. But in fact, what he says here, we could also apply to acoustics, about the evolutionary advantage of art and music as a form of communication, the power of music to promote group cohesion, to make explicit identity of the group as a whole and of the individual belonging to the group, and also giving these evolutionary advantages to individuals with well-developed capacities for musical action and perception. Right. This refers mainly, as I said, to music. If we will see later on the power of sound, but let me first deal with emotion. Emotions are complicated collections of chemical and neural responses forming a pattern. All emotions have some kind of regulatory role to play, leading in one way or another to the creation of circumstances advantageous to the organism exhibiting the phenomenon. So what we want to see is how this music, how this acoustics relates to emotion, because that's going to explain the power of this sound, this music. So what we want to see is the relationship of both with this culture, but also within the context of sensory research. So trying to understand the importance of the intangible in the past, in how past communities behaved, felt the world, and understood the world. So sound has the potential of stimulating powerful emotions. Sound confers places with extraordinary agency. And why? Because sound creates has some effects on us. So if we see the frequency of sound, high-pitched sounds create discomfort to us, whereas low-pitched sounds denote calm, sadness, fear. The intensity is also important. Soft is usually fine. Very loud sounds cause discomfort as well. Rhythm, if the rhythm is slow, it gives an idea of calm. Fast excitement, too fast anxiety. So sounds make us feel in particular ways. And this is not only cultural, it's also very physical. And it is universal because of all these effects. For example, what echo might create on us, this very loud sound, very quick in a way, it makes us feel like this feeling of fear, of danger. The way then different cultures will interpret it will be different, but the reaction is similar in all humans. So where are we going to, where did we propose to do this field work? We had been working in the Mediterranean area. We then thought about other places in the world in which we could work, and propose the places in Asia, in Siberia, in Africa, South Africa, and in the Sonoran Desert that includes Baja California, California, and other places. And then we said, okay, if there is a problem, there could be other places in the world, which are the blue dots as possibilities, whereas the red dots could be the places where we were planning to work. Don't know whether you are seeing the band above, and I'm sorry for this. I'm not sure whether you can see it. Probably yes, but and I don't know how to remove it. But anyway, so we had, as I said, we had worked in the Mediterranean, and this is an example of a place where we had worked in France, in Bonbrune. So we have this landscape. Why we find the paintings in some sites and not others, in some shelters and not others. And in our previous work, and this was under the Sonat project with Tommaso Mattioli, what we saw is that the places where the sound reflected better in terms of echoes, these were the shelters that had been painted. So acoustics had something to do with rock art, as we saw in the Sonat project. For the Artsoundscapes project, there are 5 research lines: acoustical physics, psychoacoustics, neuroacoustics, ethnography, ethnomusicology, and rock art landscape ontologies. So what I'm going to do now is to go through each of them and explain the work that has been done in some of the work that has been done in those research lines. So research line 1, acoustical physics. The challenge here was to create a rigorous methodology. So Archaeoacoustics had started earlier, and about 30 years ago. There are already some articles about this, but the problem with those first works is that the work done was not repeatable. So we had to believe, so to say, what the researcher was telling us, and there wasn't a search for models for repeatability. So the first thing that we did, and we had already started this in the Sonat project, was together with Angelo Farina, who is a well-known acoustical engineer working at the University of Parma and one of the senior researchers in this project, we developed a new way of measuring acoustics. It's an adaptation of methods developed for room acoustics to the measurement of rock art landscapes. So in this research line, we have had Angelo Farina, and still have Angelo Farina working, Adriano Farina, and Lydia Alvarez, who is now the main person responsible for this research line. How can we measure acoustics? Throughout the years that I've been working in archaeoacoustics, I've gone through several methods to measure acoustics. The one that we are using now is an adaptation or the development of what was created in 2015. So we have now new microphones and new sound sources, but it is really the same type of methodology. So what we do is to use a sine sweep sound that is then received in this dodecahedral, so it's omnidirectional, and this is received by a microphone or 2 types of microphones that we have. One is an omnidirectional microphone, and the other one is a third order ambisonics. Right. In the field, let's see whether this works. What we do is we put the sound source and the receiver in different points, and we measure how the sound in different positions in the rock art places. Let me see now. Right.
I come from a very ski.
Right. Okay. So in this way, then we create, we receive this. Let me go to the previous one. We can create some tables in which, as I will show at the so that later on in the project, we get several parameters that are reverberation, speech clarity, music clarity, and so on. So several parameters that then we check and we see whether there's some sort of repeatability in the different places that we have measured. Right, in the second, I don't know how to remove this band here. Sorry. In the second research line, which is psychoacoustics, the aim of this research line is, can we understand how these people thought or felt in the past? Not quite, but what we want to see is the subjective impressions of listeners, of how their impressions are influenced by cognitive factors. So how we can study the auditory perception and interpretation, and how, or whether people like or not what they are listening. So in order to do that, we have created a lab in the psychology faculty here at the University of Barcelona. And the aim of this lab is to allow for oralizations. So it's stimulating the experience of acoustic phenomena rendered as a sound field in a virtualized space. So basically what we do is, with the parameters that we have recorded in the field, we then, with the third order ambisonics, we then convolute sounds for someone in this lab to be able to hear the sounds as if they were in the place. So, right, but what type of sounds? And we have had a discussion about this, and as I'm going to show you next or later, we have already also used some recordings in cathedrals and have made some experiments with classical music and medieval or post-medieval buildings. So let me first introduce you, that I haven't done, the people responsible for this research line. We have senior scientist Carles Estera. We had Jose Valenzuela working, but then he found another job, and now for the last year and a half we have had Samantha Lopez. So what Samantha, in this case together, wants to sing. Stop this. Okay. What Samantha with Raquel have done, and this has been a combination, and Raquel I will introduce later, has been to organize some anechoic recordings. Anechoic chambers are chambers in which sound is, or the reflections of sound are minimized to the maximum. So what we saw is that we needed some anechoic recordings in order to then put them together with the sounds that we had been recording in the rock art places. So there were several styles recorded. And the first one, rock and pop songs that are thought to be known by most of the people, most of the participants that are then later on going to participate in experiments. And then also Catalan traditional music and other foreign traditions such as Altair traditional music. So what you were listening now, a couple of times you have heard now, has been a melody from a Catalan traditional song, although in this case the song wasn't sung, but, with the sound, so convoluted with the sound, how it would sound in this site in Roca Roja. In this case, we have Guillem Codern. We are listening to Guillem Codern playing convoluted his playing convolved with the impulse response from the rocky cliff of Adifan, which is the one that you have here in the photograph. And this comes from our work in Altai. And what you are listening is this type of throat singing that is typical to this area of Siberia, in fact, of most of Siberia and adjacent areas, is the throat singing. So, but as I said, Samantha has also done some work with music, classical music, convolved with some buildings for which. So the idea is this music was produced for this type of building. Let's see whether people can appreciate the difference if this is played in a different building. So she has done this type of research, asking people to give a mark or to say how much joy or sadness, tension, wonder they felt when they heard these sounds, depending on the building in which they were supposedly listening to them. Right. In research line 4, which is neuroacoustics, the research done is relates to the physiological reactions that people may have or have to the sound of rock art landscapes. If they experience a psychological and physiological reaction similar to feelings and brain patterns related to transcendence and meditation. And this is that if we were trying to study the sacred or think that rock art sites might have been a place where rituals or some transcendental understanding was going on, let's see then whether music could be related to that or whether it could help. So the idea of neuroacoustics then is to study this. This research line is, given that is related to one of the post pre-docs, is still very much in sort of it's evolving. But I thought that perhaps you would like to hear part of a short video that Raquel Aparicio, who is the person together with Professor ScRAP, who is leading this research line. So a video that she made for the Festival of Science. So let's see whether this works and whether I can show you.
Com hem dit, un dels objectius del projecte és entendre com l'acústica d'indrets arreu del món ens fa sentir. De fet, tot el que sentim, pensem, fem i som està al nostre cervell, que és aquest òrgan creat de cèl·lules especialitzades anomenades neurones. Les neurones són les encarregades de processar els estímuls que altres òrgans sensorials, com l'oïda, capten. Cada una d'elles processa d'informació diversa de l'estímul, com el volum, la freqüència o la direcció del so. Per comunicar-se entre elles, les neurones utilitzen senyals elèctriques i, finalment, l'acció conjunta de totes elles produeix el que percebem. Nosaltres podem aprofitar la naturalesa elèctrica del processament i comunicació de les neurones per explorar el que està passant al nostre cervell. I ho fem amb això que esteu veient en pantalla, amb un electroencefalograma. Es tracta d'un barret que té situats elèctrodes que capten les senyals elèctriques de neurones que treballen en sincronia. Segons el nostre estat mental, les senyals que capten aquests elèctrodes canvien moltíssim. En aquest projecte, mitjançant l'electroencefalograma, volem analitzar què passa al nostre cervell quan escoltem l'acústica de localitzacions de mar rupestre i si aquestes mesures es poden relacionar amb un estat mental que considerem místic, com per exemple un sentiment de transcendència. Mesurant les reaccions emocionals i neurològiques a les acústiques d'abrics a mar rupestre, des del projecte Artsoundscapes arribarem a entendre el perquè de les localitzacions on es troba aquest tipus d'art tan antic. Si voleu saber-ne més, podeu anar a la pàgina web del projecte, seguir-nos a Facebook o inclús formar part dels nostres descobriments participant en els nostres experiments de psicoacústica i electroencefalograma. Us hi esperem!
Okay. Now I hope that you were able to read the translation. Right. So that's basically what she is trying to do, or the basis of what she's trying to do. Right. And also what then the anechoic. Some of the anechoic recordings that we made, in fact, will be for the research line. I hear a sound, and I guess that someone has their microphone on. Anyway, anechoic recordings. So what the recordings that we made for research line 4 were membranophones. Similar to those used in shamanistic traditions in Siberia and America and other instruments. So in order to know more about this research line, I'm afraid that you will have to wait because the experiments have to be undertaken. Right, then we have research line 4, ethnomusicology, and the idea of this research that has had several members of the project, Dirk de Wijk, Ana Maria Alarcón, and Raquel Jiménez Pasalodos. The aim of this research line was to search in archives about acoustics in rock art sites. And in fact, the idea was that we know a lot, or we know things that may have been written in English, but not so much research written in French or in German, or in other languages indeed. I'm not sure that we have been extremely successful in this, but we have done some work with archives, with archival work in the Smithsonian Institution, and we have also been reading Russian sources because of our work in Altai. And also we have been doing some work with prehistoric musical, or some studies of prehistoric musical instruments in the areas where we have worked. So some of this research was undertaken, for example, by Raquel Jiménez before we went to Altai, and she went to Paris and did some research in the library of French sources and some of the German sources and Russian sources about Altai. And we have now, it's about to be finished, this paper discussing some of the results together with some of the results that then we had in the field. So what do we know about the landscapes where the rock art sites were placed? What she found out was that the landscapes and the identification of landscapes had importance, and especially sacred. There were some places in the landscape that were and are still sacred. And there's this belief of sacred places in being inhabited by spirits, and spirits that can be found in mountains, rocks, caves, holes, and rock cracks. They are also in mountain passes and rivers, and also archaeological sites are considered as special. So there is this connection between sonorous soundscapes and musical aesthetics, with this diphonic singing, this type of throat singing, this type of singing and musical instruments in the area have mythical origins. Spirit sings and inspire songs. They like listening to people singing, and stories and song may be offered to them. So if we find that the rock art places are places where spirits might be expecting people to sing and play, will they have them this type of acoustic characteristics, or the perfect acoustic characteristics for people to play music in them? That would be one of the questions to ask once we know that a tradition in the area is that spirits like to hear. So the best musician is the one that has learned, who has learned to hear the spirits and nature. So there's this connection also with nature. So spirits sing, they also hear, and there are offerings made in sacred places to please the spirits who live in that place. And part of that offerings are also in the form of music and in the form of storytelling, as I was saying. So when we went to do our fieldwork in Altai, we saw that in some of the places with rock art, we could see some offerings, and this is in the middle of nowhere. So in a way, it was strange that the place was considered sacred by people still today. So what do we know about, or what do the written sources tell us about the places where rock art was made? The written sources say very little about rock art, and there might be different reasons for that. One might be that perhaps rock art was not made at the time anymore, but it could also be that anthropologists didn't pay, or explorers didn't pay much attention, and also that they did the research mainly in villages, away from the places where the rock art was being produced and or was being used. But there are some stories about sacrifice rituals held in the vicinity of petroglyphs, and this information comes in or is dated in 1910. And also today, some petroglyph sites are considered as sacred, although in this case, I think that we have to be careful with the information coming from today, because we really don't know whether, to what extent this can be completely traditional. But Jean-Claude had an experience, or there was a ceremony in his honor at the crest of a superb cliff covered with prehistoric art in Tuva, which is one of the neighboring areas to Alta. Right. So how can we put all this together? There's a group of archaeologists, and there's one missing from this photograph, which is a new member who has joined the project recently. But here we have Tommaso Mattioli, Nehemias Santos da Silva, and Laura Fernandez, and now Antonio Torres, who are working, or who as archaeologists have been working in this project. So how can we go beyond, or how can we put all this together and try to see this connection between rock art, between acoustics, and between and with this sense of so the understanding of the landscape as an ontological place. Right. So if we go back to this example of Siberia, of Urkosh, the place of Urkosh that I have shown earlier, if we have the results of the acoustic tests, what we can see is that music clarity is very high. So we were saying, if the places where people were gathering and carving were places where spirits were listening, then can we see that in the acoustics of the place? Right. What we can see is that there are very high levels of music clarity, and this happens in the places where there are more carvings or more impressive carvings, because we found the same in Grand Yaloman, Bolshoi Yaloman, in the area, also a place that has several kurgans that are sort of burial places, where people have been going back once and again, because the carvings there have several periods, from the Bronze Age and perhaps even earlier to the Iron Age, to the then Turkic period, and then even nowadays. So this was a special place, and again, what we found in the tests that we undertook there was that, again, music clarity was very high, and abnormally high. So what we could say that seems to be this connection of music clarity and rock art sites, especially the most important rock art sites. But I think that we have to be careful. Acoustics is not everything. As you can see here in Bolshoi Yaloman, Grand Yaloman, the geology of the place is also different. So you are approaching the site, and even if you don't know where it is, you say, wow, I think it is going to be there. Yes, it is a special place. It is a special place in with many other senses. Visually, the type of rock is different, feels different, and the acoustics is different. So we are halfway through the project now. We are in year 4. We have produced, I don't know, 12, 13 papers, and some of them discuss things that I haven't talked about here. And if you want to know more about the project, you are invited to look at our webpage and dive into the information that we have there. So I hope that you have enjoyed the talk, and that you have a better idea of what we are doing in the Artsoundscapes project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marga. That was absolutely fascinating, and what a huge amount of work you've been doing. So thank you very much for kind of giving us this little tiny insight into the vast scope of your work. We've just got, just remind people, if you have questions for Marga, please just pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll put them to Marga. We have one question at the moment, which if you're happy to answer some questions, Marga. This is from Liz H. As someone with a professional interest in deafness, you talk about measuring the sounds. And she says, when I talk about measuring sound, I'm talking volume and frequency. So sound level meter, oscilloscope. I can't even, sorry, I should be able to pronounce this word. Oscilloscope. Sorry if that's wrong. What are you measuring exactly, and for what?
Right. We are measuring, as I said, we are based, we are mainly listening, or sorry, recording acoustic parameters. But it is true that we were recently in a Paleolithic cave, which is Las Chimeneas, where one of the members of the project, Nehemias, who has a very deep voice, sort of said like, oh, and the whole, I can't say the whole cave, it was us. We could feel the sound in our bodies. So of course this had an effect, and we were, the group of us who were there, we were sort of, wow, this is amazing. Right, it can be amazing, but I would say now, if we want to see whether if this is relevant, we should then go to similar places and see whether we find the same effect, because otherwise it can be just chance. So if we want to distinguish what is chance to what is a sought effect, so that people were searching for that effect in order to paint in particular places, then we have to search for patterns. We have to search for similar places with similar results.
Okay, well that sort of goes on to the next question by Margaret, who says, was any form of control or comparison applied in the experiments? For example, were similar music tests carried out in other caves in the same localities and other localities which did not contain rock art, to see if the acoustics were similar, better or worse than those that did have rock art?
Yeah, we have tried to do that. It is, I should say, sometimes it's very difficult to measure places that haven't got rock art, because it's like this feeling that, oh, we are wasting our time. And also because of something else. It's because archaeologists record places with rock art, but they never record similar places without rock art. So in order to check why particular places were chosen, we should have the other information. But anyway, sometimes we have made the effort and gone and searched and found some places without rock art. And this a very clear example was in Valtorta years ago, where there was a clear difference between the places with and without rock art. Sort of generally speaking, there could have been one place with fantastic acoustics without rock art, but sort of looking at all the data, it was clear that there had been some selection. What we have done in other areas has been to see whether there are differences between the type of motifs that have been painted in one places and not in others. So in Catalonia, for example, that we've been measuring all sites, where the difference was the acoustic of the places with, let's say, hunting scenes, was it different to others in which no hunting scenes were painted. And we did all that. We analyzed statistically all the results, and unfortunately, in this case, we didn't find any positive results. So they didn't seem, the people were not selecting places because of sound in order to paint one thing or the other. So we are always trying to compare things, because without comparison, it is very difficult to say that the results that you have obtained are good or bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Just sort of on the, a slight variation on that, was there any sort of range of, in terms of the volume of rock art at certain sites in relation to the kind of volume of noise or sound or that could be produced? So was it rather than types of depictions, could it be something related to kind of volume of depiction?
What we have found in one of the other areas that we did, I mean, in Valtorta, this was the case as well, in Castellón in Spain, that the places with the best acoustics, the 3 places with the best acoustics, so 3 out of 17, were the places with more rock art depictions. And we have found a similar pattern in an area more to the south, in which the main rock art site that could be one of these places where people were gathering, this place is the one with the best acoustics.
Okay, interesting.
So what I'm trying to say here also is that not everything works in all areas. So it is very cultural. Even in prehistory, it was very cultural. In some areas, they liked certain patterns or certain types of acoustics. In other areas, they might have liked other ones. And in other areas, perhaps they didn't care. But it's one of the other ways in which we can look at prehistoric communities and try to understand it better. So what we are not going to find always is the same type of cultural pattern. People were, or the variability is there, and it was huge as well.
Yeah, okay. Liz H is asking whether you saw anything musical depicted in any of the art that you've recorded, or whether there's any evidence of this.
We did, Tommaso Mattioli and I wrote one article for a book published or handbook published in Oxford, and I would be happy to share it with her. So there are there are musical instruments depicted in some of the places, and Levantine art in Spain as well. They are not very frequent, and in the area of Valencia, what we have found, or it had been published, is a sound object, because not all sound objects or objects that produce sound are musical instruments. Sometimes they are functional instruments, for example, to hunt. So, and there seems to be a oval object that is connected or is depicted in several occasions in hunting scenes. So it seems to be an instrument to attract animals or something.
Okay, interesting. Bella Mollard is asking, she says, you discuss music as singing at the sites and the acoustics associated with the sound produced there. I'm wondering if there's any correlation of natural sounds that are external to the site, e.g. thunder, occurring at these locations, and did that have any bearing on the locations for the rock art? And did your experiments take this into account?
We haven't found this for the moment. if people tell us about it, I think that we would take it into account by all means. If we, as we are thinking, if we move into doing some Paleolithic sites, definitely that to be one of the issues to look at, because we have been asking people who work in Paleolithic sites, cave art sites, and people who are experts on this, and and that has been one of the questions, whether there were natural sounds in the caves that that were striking to them, and drops falling is one of them, cascades, waterfalls,
Yeah.
and some other sounds. In other places of the world, like South Africa, Aaron Maisel published one gorge, Didima Gorge, in which he claims that the gorge has so many shelters painted because of the sound, the natural sounds, especially when or how sound travels naturally in that gorge, and how impressive it is when there's a storm and you are in that in that gorge. And again, going back to Valtorta, that was the case. That comment, we received that comment that someone who had the experience was absolutely frightened by the experience of being there when there were thunder and so on.
Interesting. I think Aaron's with us this evening. So hello, Aaron. And sort of related to that as well, Elia is asking, can the quality of the sound change according to the weather conditions? So are you including climate conditions as a factor to evaluate the place?
We have included it in some of the studies that we have made with GIS. So it is important. It is important if we have some. So if there is wind, we cannot. There's this. The microphones pick up the wind, and it is very difficult then to be able to measure the wind. But with the wind. But otherwise, we do field work whenever we can, and we are not repeating. We are not going back to the field to do experiments in different periods of the year, because it would be absolutely expensive. So we are taking it as a given that the differences won't be that great. But when we can do this cheaply, like with GIS, yes, we do take that into account.
Okay, thank you. So Margaret is asking, is there a difference in the size of cave that is typically found to have rock art and those that do not? The size or shape of the cave might influence the acoustics and provide comfort, out of the weather. And so perhaps the probability of someone carrying out rock art there on the basis of being protected from weather, animals, etc. So she's saying, there's many factors that could influence the selection of locations for rock art, and which coincidentally also impact on acoustics.
Yes, by all means. So in these places with a lot of rock art, with a lot of rock art motifs, the ones that we have found as we could call agglomeration sites, where we have found in Levantine art that there are good acoustics. Of course, the size of the place is a factor, but we have also found some other places that could be similarly have large groups of people, but they haven't got that fantastic acoustics. So what there seems to be some connection. So size, of course, is one factor, but there seems to be some connection between the good acoustics in the case of Levantine art, good acoustics, and the placement, good acoustics and the placement of or the selection of that place to do rock art. In Bombrun in France, the places seem to be very similar to each other, all the shelters. There were 42 shelters, more or less of the same shape, more or less of the same size, but only, I don't know, it was 12 or 9, 8, I think it was 8, were painted. So in that case, what we can see is that they were similar, but only those where the acoustics, the reflections were better for whatever reason, were the ones chosen to be painted.
Okay, right, thank you. So we're just going to look at a question from Liz H. Again, going back to the Altaic communities. Sorry if I pronunciated that wrong. She says, were the Altaic involved in the project, and did they say that they currently marked sites with rock art where they found sound? And is there any other evidence from indigenous societies, pre-technological indigenous societies that currently produce sound, produce rock art of using acoustics as part of their, part of the reason for choosing particular sites?
When we went to Altai, we were prepared to, in the area where we work, traditional societies have disappeared, but we were going to go more to the south, to the Mongolian, close to the Mongolian border, and we had hired someone who was to be like the intermediary person, because there has been that archaeology is a bit problematic there, or there's because of some collections that have been taken to the main city, and people there not feeling that happy with that. However, when we arrived, we were told that we needed a special visa to go to that area. To our Russian colleague hadn't realized, because she was allowed to go to that area. So in the end, we couldn't really do the work that we had thought of doing in that, and for which we had been prepared. We did some interviews. We interviewed some older senior people in the area, but the Russian Revolution was more than 100 years ago. There are no survivors of that period, and during the Soviet period, especially in that area that was sort of a communication area between mainland, or between Russia and Mongolia and Afghanistan, not Afghanistan, sorry, Kazakhstan. That area, everything had disappeared. In the US, where we were going to work in March 2019, when lockout started, we had been in touch with the Yokuts, and we were in good communication with people from the Yokuts, different groups. They don't. They might, if they do rock art, is something that we had to find out, and this is a type of work that we haven't been able to do.
Lockdown has got in the way of so much, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a question from an anonymous attendee relating to tuba. I'm wondering if the type of singing and musical instruments are influenced by the landscape and acoustics.
Yes, there's research in Tuva about the way in which people engage with the landscape when they play instruments and when they sing and when there are conversations with mountains and so on. It's a fantastic research that has been done in that area. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Stuart is asking a question about the range at which your acoustic modelling is done. So it clearly works close to cave walls, a cave and cliff walls, but what about more open sites? Is there a kind of landscape scale of acoustic differences?
We try always to keep the same distance between the sound source and the receiver. Obviously, in open landscapes, as we are mainly, I mean, even if we are close to rock art and walls or rock art shelters, it is pretty much open space. But I don't think, I mean, we are always trying to keep the same distance. It is obvious that in the open air, the music, the reflections won't be fantastic because there's nothing to reflect against. And this is a main difference to the proper room acoustics, where you are in a building and you have all these reflections coming from different walls and so on. But the technique is the same.
I've lost you. Sorry, I lost you for a minute there, Marga.
All right. Has everybody?
I'm losing.
Just to say,
sorry, Marga, I'm losing
Marga,
you
you're
a
coming
bit here.
through.
You're coming. I'm not sure if it's just me losing you, but could you just say this last couple of sentences?
Okay. Perhaps yes. Okay. Someone says that they heard me all through. Yes.
Oh, okay. It's just me. I think it's just me that's having a problem here.
In which case, Tertia,
Sorry.
would you like me
it's
to
just
step
me
in?
Then,
Would you like me to step in and continue with
I'm
the
afraid,
Q&A section?
Yeah. Okay. I hope. Can you hear me all right? Please.
So.
Could you, Freddie? Because I'm coming. My sound is coming and going.
Okay, that's not a problem. I will just continue with the questions just now. So the next question is, and I apologize for my pronunciation, Marga, from Sharon.
I'll try another question. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Freddie, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep, I can hear you, Tertia.
Oh, we could.
I'll continue on with the question just now, and we can see if Tertia joins us in a moment. So are there any studies at the Thingvellir National Park in Iceland? And that's from Sharon Cheatwood.
I should say I have no idea. Sorry, there might be, but I don't know.
That's perfectly okay. Thank you for that one. It's good to sometimes go through a question a little bit quickly. This next question is what sounds did you use during the project? Human voice, drums, flute, and that is a question we don't have the name for the answer.
Right. As I said, we were using that when I started. We were using voices and whistles and so on. But nowadays, what we are doing, what we are using is a sine sweep. That is a type of sound that goes through all the frequencies, and then we can convolute it with other sounds. As I explained, that's why we have now recordings in the anechoic chamber, so that we can put together the type of acoustics of the place with sounds that can be heard as if we were in the place. So we don't have to take someone playing the flute to Altai, or someone singing in diphonic singing, because what we can do is put together the recording of the anechoic chamber with the type of acoustics that we have recorded there, put them together and hear the sound as if we were in the place.
That's wonderful, thank you. Our next question is from CK Praveen. Hello, Margarita. I am a researcher in rock art, but my question is that I have seen rock art on boulders in our area, which is South India. And also, some of these boulders produce peculiar sound if we hit them with small stone blocks. Local people correlate it with some supernatural religious affiliation. I couldn't come to any conclusion apart from the composition of rocks. What do you think? Any acoustic opinions from your experience?
I would love to receive an email from you explaining me all that. Right, this is a rock gong, and the first one to work on this, or the first one to publish, was Bernard Fagg, from who was working in the Museum of Nigeria at the time, and we started to work, and then there was an explosion of studies in the 1950s. It's very interesting how, you know, from Nigeria, then there was the Scandinavia, where someone also started to then published about rock gongs, then to in Scandinavia, and then to Paleolithic art, where in some cases there are lithophones that can be played, and some of them have like signs or dots painted. Who knows if this is related to what they were playing there. This is a study to be done. But what I haven't read is the reason why some people might have been playing, or the meanings or the ethnography behind the use of rock gongs. And there are rock gongs really all around the world. They are very, very, they are not that unusual. But I would love to hear more about India. Yes, definitely.
Hopefully we can get everyone in a project in South India soon. Our next question is, the name is just a little bit obscured, but I will just read it then. This is another question from India. At first, it's a thanks for introducing such interesting new approaches in rock art studies. I would like to hear from you whether you have found any changes in the rock art subjects painted on the walls of caves or shelters, varying on the basis of low or high acoustic places.
Right. As I said, we tried to look at that, and in the area where we have looked at it, we haven't found any good results. So what was painted in those shelters, in particular in Catalonia, and we spent hours and hours making all these statistical studies. What the type of acoustics had nothing to do with what was painted. But the fact that in Catalonia we don't find good results doesn't mean that in another area there might be good results. It depends, because culturally people are very different, and the way in which people use acoustics is very different and might vary from one area to the other. So I wouldn't be surprised that in some cases, yes, there were some differences, but in the area where we looked at this, we didn't find anything, unfortunately.
That's okay. I think Tertia's back with us, so I'll just pass back over to Tertia just now.
Thanks, Freddie. Sorry about that, Margaret. Thank you very much, Freddie. You're doing a great job. And don't know what happened to my sound there, but I think, can you hear me okay now?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
No
Okay.
problem.
So, okay, brilliant. And so Elia is asking a question. Could you find any differences in the acoustic quality between a limestone shelter and a sandstone one?
I don't know. We haven't tried that, but I guess that the material of the reflection, the sound reflection, may be different. But it doesn't matter. What I would then find it significant is if in one area I have both type of geology, and then I would compare and see whether there was some sort of preferences for one or the other. But and that's where I would find it, that this type of different geology was significant. Otherwise, yes, of course. I mean, they are different surfaces. They will have different type of reflections, but it doesn't matter if there is sound and if this is the type of rock that there is in the area, people will use it. One of the problems that we have found with sandstone is that it's very degradable. So we have been measuring some sites in Cadiz where some of the rock shelters are like, it's called bee nest. So they are really, there's a huge amount of erosion. And this has made us discuss quite a lot to the extent to which we can use this type of results. But there we are.
Okay. Were you recording, and you may have said this during the talk, so apologies if it's repeating things you've said, but were you recording other things alongside the acoustics, such as the shape and the texture and the color of the rock, to see if there was a kind of correlation between the acoustics, were people not just choosing places because of the acoustics, but also because of the visual appearance and perhaps the other sensory aspects of the rock surfaces?
Not really. I have to say that not really. We have a very extensive recording sheet for the places, but I don't think that we have included anything like color or whatever. I think that we are really focusing mainly in acoustics. I think that if we found something that was striking, something that we thought, wow, this really, we need to look at this, we would then start recording that as well. But we are focusing, our main subject is acoustics, and we code many different details, but not color, for example.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering, would you, personally, do you feel that sound was an important dimension of all rock art, regardless of whether it's in a cave shelter or open landscape?
Sound was important for everybody, and music as well, but not necessarily. This connection with rock art was not necessarily made, as I think as I said at the start of the talk. Some societies will appreciate that the acoustics are good, but some others won't care. They will say, okay, doesn't matter. It doesn't sound that great, but it is fine. So I'm not expecting to find good acoustics everywhere, but I know that music was important for everybody, and somehow acoustic might have been important for other type of places, not necessarily those with rock art. So even in a society where we don't find that connection, they might have had that connection with other type of places.
Okay. Have you come across many people today then using rock art surfaces, using the acoustics of rock art places?
There's no rock art is not being produced that much anymore. And in the places where we have been doing research is not the case. So, and as I said, it has been difficult to find information in the sources that we have searched. So, so I don't know. There might be, but not as far as we have found in our research up to now.
Okay, Margaret, thank you. We haven't got any more questions from anyone, so I think you've answered everything that people wanted to know. Freddie's posted the link to your video in the chat box if people want to watch that again, because I think we may have missed a little bit at the start of it. But really just to say thank you so much for such a kind of illuminating talk. I wish you all the best with your rest of your research and hope that COVID doesn't interfere with it anymore, and look forward to kind of hearing more about it once you've completed the project in a couple of years' time. And no doubt you've got many other things lined up after that. But just to say to everybody, thank you so much for listening tonight, for joining us, for all your questions and your comments. And as I said at the beginning, this is our penultimate webinar, so we've got one more left, which will be only in 2 weeks' time, because obviously we've got Christmas and things coming up at the end of the month. So our next webinar, which is our final one, is on Monday the 13th of December, same time at 5:30 UK time till 7 o'clock. And this is our webinar by the ScRAP team. It's called Not Set in Stone, New Perspectives on Scotland's Rock Art. And in this, there will a number of members of the team, myself, Joanna and Linda, our digital analyst, will be presenting on the work of the project and our results from the last 5 years using the data that we've co-produced with community teams. So we very much hope that you'll be able to join us for that. The registration is open and online on our website, and I think Freddie is posting in. Oh yes, Freddie's put the link in up there to where you can register and find out more about that. So really, it just remains to say thank you, Marga, for joining us, coming all the way from Barcelona online to be with us tonight. And thank you, everybody who's been listening. Thank you to Freddie for moderating, Stuart for doing the link, and Joanna and Guillaume for being there as part of the team. So look forward to seeing you again, Marga. And goodbye, everybody.